Hello, and thank you for joining us on Communal Expressions. Today, we have two different guests. Our first guest is Miss Khamille Burroughs. She is a local activist in Birmingham. And then we have Mr. Kelvin Lester from the Pride of North Birmingham, number 319, to give us a community organization update. As we go into our discussion with Khamille, wanted to remind you and give you some highlights of the Mr. Freddie Gray case. Freddie Gray was a young man in Baltimore who was arrested by the police for having, I believe, a switchblade. On the way to the jail, he asked for medical attention. Something happened on the way to the jail because the young man's spinal cord was severed in police custody, so much so that the coroner would not rule it as accidental. The coroner ruled it as a homicide. Those 6 officers were suspended. The State Attorney, Ms. Marilyn Mosby, actually reviewed the evidence for a few days and came back and filed charges against every officer. And those officers, their cases played out in the court system. Once those cases got to the court system, it is my opinion and my belief that mass media just allowed it to just kind of drop off of the radar. We did not get much coverage once those cases went to the court system. So that's the case that we're going to discuss today. And so if you would hang tight, we're going right into our interview with Khamille. So we have this incident. Once we have an incident, that we get information about that we know has occurred for the police brutality, in your mind as an activist, at that point, what are we trying to do once we know something, an incident has occurred?
I think from an activist standpoint, I think the first thing to do is definitely to bring people's attention to it, because I feel that anything that doesn't receive proper attention, like you said, media attention, but even just amongst our community, because if you really look at it, our community specifically does not have a way really to disseminate information on the scale that mass media does. So I think that definitely taking advantage of some of the technologies that we do have access to, like social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think all of these mediums have been really important in helping to get these stories out. But I think definitely now they should be playing an even larger role, because we don't, like I said, we don't have the television outlet that we need in order to really properly get our stories out the way they should be told. And so instead of having to rely, on other media, we should definitely use our activism to have Instagram and Twitter and Facebook lit up with these stories. So definitely drawing attention would be the first thing. I think second thing after drawing the attention is really rallying the community. And I don't feel like activism should be like the separate entities or these separate entities that are where leaders are springing up and governing and trying to dictate to the people what should be done. I think more access and more feedback from the community and what the community feels like should be done should be taken into consideration. And then the quote unquote leaders should be there really to help facilitate, to pour into the community, to give information that's needed. But I think a lot of it, that might be going into something else, which I'll save for a little bit later in the discussion, but definitely getting the community involved and really, really feeling how does the community feels like these situations should be handled, and also how can activists facilitate and help the community to accomplish some of their goals, not just the goals of some of the organizations that are here in the community to help, but the community itself.
So you're saying the activists also taking a part in just facilitating what the community needs, and some of those needs may not be known by that particular activist, but that activist helps facilitate it.
Right.
Awesome.
Like really getting the ear to the streets, as they would say.
Awesome. This Baltimore case, what I do remember how mass media handled it, when the riots and the protests broke out in Baltimore, the way they handled that on the media, you forgot about what the people were actually rioting about, what they were actually protesting about. They just focused on what was happening and not that Freddie Gray had died. And so I think for a while, people just, when they thought about Baltimore, all they thought about was the rioting, but that was based on mass media. But some of those avenues that you were talking about, if we were able to push more of this is what happened, this is why this is happening in this community at that time, that this story may have gotten more attention, even from not even just mass media, but from other avenues. I felt like once this case, we had a state attorney who actually took time to look at the evidence with her team, and she actually filed charges against 6 officers. And for me, that was a minor victory. Obviously, it was not the end of the case, but that was a minor victory given what we had been seeing. Did you have any thoughts on that particular point, that we actually got charges filed against police officers?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say that I think Attorney Mosby was and is a very brave and courageous woman. And I think she was definitely a powerful force in getting the case as much attention as it actually did get, because I feel like if she wasn't in that position, it would have been like so many other cases where you hear about it for a while and it gets, thrown under the rug somewhere. But that's my first statement about that. My second statement is, even in the light of her courage and what I believe was absolutely the right thing to do, still remembering that she is working within the parameters and the confines of the system. And so as much as we can celebrate that on one end, we also have to remember that, and how can I put this, even that was not really necessarily a victory. And that's tragic to have to say that, very tragic to say that, but it really wasn't. But I think that when you look at the fact that we're celebrating the charges, celebrating the fact that even charges were brought up against these officers, really shows exactly where we are in America right now. And it's really not too far from where we were 100 years ago.
Wow.
I feel technology has changed, so many things in society has changed, but I think the tenet and the basis of the society has never changed. This society is built on slave labor. And this is what makes, when you say America great, this is what has made America great, is economically speaking, is their suppression and brutalization of African people and other minorities, but particularly African people. And to try to look at it any other way, I feel like really kind of takes our minds somewhere they really shouldn't be. We really have to get back to the nitty gritty of what all of this really means.
Wow. So earlier this year, some of the charges, we had a mistrial for one of the officers. We had one officer that went to bench trial, and the judge, not jury, but to the judge, actually dropped the charges and acquitted this person. And then we came up on July, and the month of July was like a roller coaster. Well, I won't even call it a roller coaster. It was like a roller coaster that went up and took forever to come down. We had July 5th, the week of July 4th, we had July 5th, the death of Brother Alton Sterling. July 6th, the death of Brother Philando Castile. July 7th, we had the Dallas shootings. And then we had other stories that may have not made the media. The next week, we had some more police shootings, but we had some other stories of police brutality that resulted in death or violence against our African-American brothers and sisters. But I think what a lot of people missed was the third officer to go to bench trial on July 7th, which was the same day as the Dallas shootings, that one of the charges was dropped against Lieutenant Brian Rice by the prosecution. By the time we get to July 18th, the judge dropped the charge against this lieutenant. And then by the time we get to July 18th, we haven't even made it out of July, the judge acquits the lieutenant of all other charges. So I felt like, to me, like you saw it sprinkled in mass media of what was occurring, but these other cases, especially the police shootings, seem to have trumped and taken over mass media at that time. And I also feel like a part of the Black community was so traumatized, more than the Black community, it was just traumatized in 2 to 3 weeks by the violence that was happening, that the magnitude of how this judge ruled the second time in this case really did not sink in, because it really became like a domino effect. So I can imagine the prosecution team got to a point where they said, okay, we've got 1 mistrial, we've got 2 bench trials where they're opted to go the bench trial route, and the same judge has acquitted 2 different officers. And so after that, all 3 of the remaining officers, their charges were dropped. There was so much going on. You had incidents that were occurring, but then you had past incidents that had actually made it to the court system, that key decisions were being made, but the focus had seemed to be so much on the current incidents. Can you speak to that? How does an activist, what do we do? How can we keep, for lack of better terminology, the fire burning on both ends?
That was like a really great point that you brought up, that I think a lot of people misses or passes over their heads, because this machine is a beast, like it's not a joke. It's a really elaborate system that I think a lot of people don't really get how complex it is. But the beast has a lot of arms and a lot of legs, and when I say it was a great distraction, honestly, to use those other incidents to really detract attention away from what was going on with the Freddie Gray case and these officers, because you can snap your fingers and be like, look over here, and then what's really, really crucial, everybody's really missing. And it's become so easy in today's society, especially, to distract people, period, everyone. But even more so with the sensationalism and the crazy things that are happening, but just utterly mind-blowing things that are happening. And then the ability of news to travel so fast, it's like this culture, as they say, the popcorn culture or the microwave generation or whatever. It's like multiplied to the 10th power. So even with issues as serious and as lasting as, racial unrest and brutality, mistreatment, it's still so easy for people to get distracted. And I feel like I will say there's no one answer to saying how to keep people, how to keep like you said, the flames are burning at both ends, and be able to pay attention to multiple things happening at once. I feel like that's where we need to have a lot of arms and extensions in the community, so that things like this don't lose, the fire doesn't die out underneath these issues.
Everybody hang tight. We're going to take a break from our interview from Khamille and go into our community spotlight. So today, for our community organization spotlight, we have Mr. Kelvin Lester. Kevin is a member of Pride of North Birmingham, number 319. Kevin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well today. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. We're so happy to have you here. So can you tell us a little bit about your organization?
All right. Like you said, my organization is the Pride of North Birmingham. We're lodge number 319, and we are chartered under the Most Worshipful Prince Hall, F&AM, Grand Lodge of Alabama. Prince Hall Masonry is the oldest and most ancient recognized form of regular colored Freemasonry. It has ties that date back to the late 1700s, and it continues to follow the then established tenets of brotherly love, relief, and truth. Our main goal is to aid in making good men better.
Now, I heard that you all were doing a temple restoration and that we were raising funds for that.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
So how are you guys going about that?
What we have proposed is we have a challenge coin, and on the front of that coin it has a picture of our temple that depicts the way it was back in those earlier days when it was in its when it had a lot of historical significance to the African American community. On the back, it has pictures of Masonic emblems as well as the Order of the Eastern Star emblems, because both of those grand chapters were housed in that particular building. So we're just asking for donations of $25 for those challenge coins, and those proceeds will go to our Grand Lodge to aid in that renovation project.
Okay. So, Kevin, we know that the temple restoration will have benefits to the Prince Hall affiliated Masons and organizations at large in Alabama, but what benefits will the temple restoration have for the community of Greater Birmingham?
You're absolutely correct. Initially, restoring the temple will restore the pride of many African American citizens in the city. It will give them a connection to something that shaped the lives of many of their fathers and grandfathers. In relating to the future, the temple will serve as a mixed-use facility that will house business developments and a storm shelter in case of emergencies. The temple will also be home to a museum that will showcase several pieces of history that is relevant to Prince Hall Masonry and the struggles during the time of the Civil Rights Movement. This renovation project will serve to add another piece to the historical Civil Rights District of Birmingham.
Wow. So as you were talking, I was thinking this would be a great gift for my fathers, my brothers, and some of my cousins. So what does someone need to do, my listeners and myself, if we want to get one of these challenge coins?
The challenge coins, if you would like to purchase one of those, you can contact us on Facebook at The Master's Closet, and you'll find other gifts on that site as well. But like I said, that primary contact would be The Master's Closet through Facebook. Also, you can contact one of the brothers of the Pride of North Birmingham 319. Most notably of those brothers will be our worshipful master, Timothy L. Sanford, who's a 32nd degree Mason. His contact number is 205-396-7786. Again, that number is 205-396-7786. Or I can be contacted as well. And my contact number is 205-329-4443.
We're back now to continue the rest of our analysis with Khamille Burroughs.
I want to say, again, some of this may seem like a bit harsh, but I feel like we are being, even ourselves, are so desensitized to our own abuse. And I keep going back to slavery, and I've been doing so much research there. It's like my heart has been there because there's so many things, of course, you just don't learn, and they're not ever going to tell you. But just researching the psychology and the culture and the energy and the environment of slavery, it shows me so many things about current times. And you can become desensitized to your own brutality or the things that are happening to you when they happen on such a daily basis. They never really stop happening, but now attention is being drawn to it. But it's like, I think we as a community are just desensitized to brutality in general. And then especially with African American people, it's like we've learned to survive so long with pain. It's like we're desensitized to our own pain.
Wow.
Anytime it would take like a fire to be raised and to be lit under you, to be so outraged at the death of this young man, his spinal cord was severed. Yes. I mean, when you think about the brutality that was inflicted on this man's body, I just go back to the mistreatment of slaves, and not even just slaves. It's like after that. I mean, slavery ended in 1865, but then you have 100 years of brutality after that, where people were being lynched and maimed and beaten and castrated. All these things. You think about 230 40, 50 years really of this occurring to us, I think we become desensitized. And I feel like maybe activism is more so about sparking that again, raising our humanity, because I feel like we've been brutalized so long, it's like we almost expect it. And as far as activism goes, I think maybe that's part of keeping that flame lit is continuing to remind each other of our humanity, that we don't have to take this.
Wow. That's good. Reminding each other of our humanity.
Yeah.
That is in itself is activism. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have, like you said, 6 officers that got charged that are not in prison. Freddie Gray is still dead. And, they got charged, went through the judicial process, the court process, and nobody is found guilty of not even a single charge. How do we keep the faith and continuing the hope that we're making progress? How do we do that?
I just want to go really quickly back to Rodney King, which is, I think, forever like etched into the American psyche. But one of the first incidents, like on video, where it was caught, where the police literally, but for the grace of God, beat a man to death. On film, it was captured. And the response, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, like 6 officers there, 5 or 6. It was between that number that were acquitted of those charges. And then he was like, skip, now over 20 years. And we have the same thing. Freddie Gray's death wasn't captured, or his beating, his brutalization wasn't captured, but of course the end result is the same. So as far as to your question about how do we keep the faith, I feel like we really have to change our thinking about who the police are, because I really feel like we're disillusioned by the police because I think we have the wrong idea about the purpose of the police. And I feel like when we get clear about police purpose, then we won't be so disillusioned by their actions, and we can actually change our thinking to be able to fight this on a different level. And I'm saying that because I just want to like share a little bit of history about the origins of the police. The police, the American police, as we know them, were derived from slave catchers. So the word patroller actually stems from the word patty roller or patter roller, which was another name that slave patrols were given. Slave patrols originally were volunteers from the community. They were normally given a freedom from taxes or like county or state taxes, fees, because they were doing a service to the community at large to keep the slave population in check, because it was a danger to the whole community if slaves rebelled or ever got to the place of being able to free themselves. The community was constantly in fear of slave uprisings, rebellions, takeovers, revenge per se. And so these slave patrollers started off as this men in the community, usually lower to middle income men, who would patrol the community, catch runaway slaves, require slaves that were off the plantation to show passes from their masters. They will also raid slave cabins and periodically check for hidden weapons, things that slaves were not supposed to have, weapons, books, evidence of them knowing how to read or write, anything that slaves were not supposed to have, these cabins were raided. So no-knock warrant. This was the beginning of the no-knock warrant. You busted up in the cabin, and you had the permission to. In fact, you were expected. White men, in general, there was a fine written into the slave codes that if a white man was required to ask a slave that was off the plantation for his or her pass.
Wow.
Required by the law to do this. And so later, the patrollers, they were picked from state militia. So the military academies in the South, slave patrollers were chosen from these groups. And so after, slavery was abolished, the patroller actually became a cop, a police officer. And also, of course, groups like the Ku Klux Klan. So knowing the origins of who the police actually are, I think can put a little bit more clarity into exactly, again, where we are as Black people in this country. I feel like we have to get really, really clear on that, because only when you actually know your position can you create a strategy of war against your enemy. If you don't know where you are, if you don't know what's happening, really, a zebra, as they say, doesn't change its stripe.
Yes.
What we have to ask ourselves, what has happened in this country that has made this country really any different from what it was 200 years ago, 100 years ago. Let's even go 60 years ago. What has happened that has made this country so different? And when you think about it, really nothing. And this is not to be like cynical or anything, but it's just to give us a bite, a real dose of reality about how things have switched around. The plantation, which, lived into the, 1860s. After slavery was abolished, they took the prison system and they actually used prisoners to do the same thing as slaves. They worked the plantations. They worked for the industries that exist right now in this country. Another type of slave labor was used for. When you fast forward right now to 2016, and you're talking about the prison industrial complex and what it's made out of and what's happening, and the privatization of the prison system is no different. It's changed because of the year and the look of society, but the fundamental elements of the society has not changed. You don't change pathological liars, murderers, thieves. It doesn't change. It's literally not only passed down through the generations, so pathology-wise, but the current structure is that which it was 100 years ago, which is really thievery, robbery, suppression, oppression, used to support our economy.
Wow.
That's what it comes down to.
Wow.
So our faith has to stem from our knowing of who and what we really are. Our faith also has to come from our deep realization of where we are, where we really are, not necessarily where we will hope to be, where we are and what we have to really do. Are we willing to do what we have to do to really be free? As Malcolm says, by any means necessary. By any means necessary requires an attitude of sacrifice. Requires if I had to, if I'm a woman and I'm in an abusive relationship, and I know this man is going to kill me eventually, I would rather leave with the clothes on my back and nothing than stay here, than stay in this. And I use that analogy because for these last 400 years, we've been in a system of domestic terrorism, domestic abuse, a domestic violent situation that's not going to get better. What makes a man in a domestic violent situation stop? And when you turn that over, America is profiting from this. So if your love is money, and if your main goal is to get money by any means necessary, what's going to cause you to stop? What's going to be your motivation to stop?
Based on, I was taking notes as we were talking and dialoguing. So the main things I got from you today was, we have to rethink the role of an activist. We have to look at the activist from the standpoint of some of that activism is being a facilitator in the community, for the community, and then understand that reminding each other of our humanity is also a form of activism. That's very powerful. And then understanding, who we are, understanding who the police are from a historical point. How did they develop? What happened then? Where are we now? And being honest about where we are now, and are we really willing to go by any means necessary to change what is occurring, what is taking place?